the feet, like in Eden, they were naked and felt no shame. But once they were fallen, they felt shame when they saw each other naked. Okay, and they can never, like, they can never go back to that childlike state of not feeling because they have the knowledge, right, from the tree. Does that make sense? And in exactly the same way, once you've lost that childlike fear of the spark, you can't really get back there, because you're like a kind of you're like a kid who's been told that Father Christmas isn't real, or you've gone to Disneyland and you're like, oh yeah, that's just a guy in a mask there. You're not buying into the kayfabe anymore, if that makes any sense. So it's basically impossible to recover once it's gone, because it's the loss of innocence.
Well, and not only is it impossible to breach that barrier between different seasons, but even between civilizations, right? Your meme that civilization is incommunicable, which I believe is from Gobinu, right?
Mm-hmm.
It is interesting, right, that through the first half of my life, the kind of liberal progressives who are quite sure that all these men are horribly racist, and to be fair, a lot of them were, but we're kind of carrying this banner of kind of cultural relativity, or at least sensibly, right? The idea that, you cannot say what is, good or wrong, for any other culture than yours, until they've sort of achieved dominance. And then at that point, right, it's, my way or the highway. And in all of this, I thought it was kind of interesting that, my whole life, that was the liberal, the progressive thing to say, maybe not to believe, but to say.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, in Spengler and, these men who are very much of the hard right, whatever you say of them, have kind of a more genuine sense of cultural relativity. And I think it's sort of an interesting paradox that.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I wanted to do, kind of not the main thrust of the book, but kind of side bar, if you want, is basically recapturing some of these ideas from the left and giving them their proper home on the right. I think we're taught to think that cultural relativism is a bad thing, as that's postmodern or whatever. But actually, it's right there in Vico, right? It's right there in Spengler and Vico and Gobineau and all these other people. And I think that there's a real grain of truth there, right? It's almost impossible. I mean, we've seen it. We can see it with our own eyes, right? If you look at the black population of America, they've been there for, 300 years now? And it doesn't really matter how long they spend there, or how much money is spent, or how many kind of university courses they're sent on, or, what propaganda they're fed. They will embody their own culture soul and nobody else's. And it doesn't, and they have an innate sense of that. And I think that the liberal project, and many people on the so-called right who talk about integration and various other kind of utopian pipe dreams, they want to say, no, it's just a matter of education and culture, and all we need to do is basically, treat this man to act like us, and give him the correct. Well, maybe he doesn't want that. Maybe he'll never want that. That's just one. That's just one example. You can pick any group you want. Group of Chinese guys. They're never going to. It doesn't matter how long or hard you try to do it. You can get isolated cases. You can get like the one Thomas Sowell, or the your mate in school. But in almost all of those cases, you'll find kind of various exceptional circumstances. There'll be one-offs. It won't be the entire community together, right? And I think the sooner everybody, and in a strange way, the left are already there, Unfortunately, it comes wrapped with kind of, white man bad theology on top of it, right? But they essentially get this on the left, on the heart, in the kind of so-called CRT and all that sort of stuff. They kind of get what I'm saying. They just want to kind of wrap it up in an oppressive narrative, and really, that's not the ultimate conclusion. Shouldn't be, oh, we need to change all of society to, push this oppressive versus oppressed narrative. Ultimately, it should be all of these people should have a right to a kind of self-governing, almost hermetically sealed community where they get to enjoy a society run along the lines that they want, not trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, or vice versa. And this is one of my reasons that I not only believe that multiculturalism is impossible, Jay. I mean, I'll qualify that in a second. The sort of multicultural societies that we're trying to run in the West today are impossible, as we're living through and seeing every day. I also believe that the kind of dream of integration, which ultimately means everybody destroying their own culture, not just white people, everybody. You basically have to destroy the the Mexican in yourself, or the Indian in yourself. You have to just everybody has to just become like some variant of this gay liberalism. And I just think that, I mean, especially over the past few weeks, we're just seeing how it doesn't work. It just doesn't. It's like trying to teach a dog to be a vegetarian or something. Human beings will not brook this. So it would be better to have a situation where, each set of people got to, be with their own, essentially. And unfortunately, liberal democracy hates this idea, and the American government, whenever there's been anybody in the various minority groups who thinks along these ways, destroys them. Whether it's Malcolm X or, when Muhammad Ali started talking this way, they didn't want it. So, that would be what I would say about civilization is incommunicable. Ultimately, this is something everybody knows deep down. Anyway, carry on. Yeah.
There's another level to that critique as well, right? That not only can you can't understand across those barriers, right? It'll never be the same. But also you can never be how your ancestors were. And, there are kind of two dueling myths in the American boomer conservative heart, right? And that is the myth of MLK, which I think we have devoted enough time to attacking. And then on the other hand, the myth of, Alex Jones screaming 1776 will commence again. Mm. And the problem is, it's just not how it works. You can be inspired by something, right? Obviously, the American Southern tradition was to a certain degree, inspired by, the Hellenic one. But the idea that it's the same thing is laughable. And again, right, it's so clearly incorrect, but it's sort of this kind of like reflexive need to have something. And I don't know, I'm curious, what do you think about that dynamic?
Yeah, I mean, I think that people will want to feel drawn to worship their ancestors. Let's just put it that way, okay? And I think that modernity and the liberal democratic system, what we call the GAE, right, the Global American Empire, does everything it can possible to prevent that. It really doesn't like the idea of, it's kind of anti-traditional in that sense, and actively tries to destroy it. I actually think that this is one of the roots that one of the reasons why the Islamic world sees itself as being at war with the West, because it understands that ultimately American expansion means the death of their the death of their culture. And really, in a strange way, people in the West kind of, rather than say, okay, I mean, on the one hand, they're civilizational enemies, right? And, they represent a threat. But on the other hand, it's kind of trying to think about that point of view from your own point of view, i.e., the American Empire is also destroying British culture and French culture, and even bizarrely American culture itself. I mean, it's kind of like self-immolating. It's kind of anti-civilizational, as I see it, and that is because it doesn't allow a kind of veneration of your own people and your own ancestors. Even the minority groups that it kind of takes under its wing as pets, it doesn't really allow a proper expression of those things either, because it's all like, it's very like skin deep. It's never like a kind of deep exploration of like even like I mean, look at the Native Americans in America. In the end, it just ends up being like a couple of like trinkets sold by the side of the road. It's not like a kind of actual expression of their ancestral spirit or something. It's always kind of fake and gay, if that makes any sense. So yeah.
And that transition is common to empires, right? I believe that Spengler made the distinction, and this is in German, so I will not quote it exactly, but the difference between a culture and a civilization, right? That at a certain point, the culture dies and the civilization keeps going. And I don't want to, reopen kind of an old Twitter wound, but that seems to be sort of the problem at the core of, do you remember Slopgate a while back? When we all got into arguments about, American food. And in that, right, is essentially an empire whose culture has been killed. What was there is kind of gone and turned and commodified. That, like you said, well, what does it mean to be a quote unquote Native American? Well, you have a casino, where you get to wear a feather. What does it mean to be a Mexican American? Well, you can have, your certain brand of, kind of like poorly constructed ethnic slop, right? And kind of apply for any other, ethnic group. And
maybe you get to own a restaurant with a sombrero on the top of it or something,
Exactly, right. And in that, you see the full and total destruction of that asabaya, right? That concept of, I am a member of a group. I'm expected to act a certain way. I'm expected to kind of sacrifice for a group. And I think that the tragedy in all of this is that there are people who still act like that is true. People, and I think this is less and less the case in America, right? But people who still feel like they have that, but it's a one-sided bargain, right? They're signing up, for wars like it is a country run for them. Maybe enough said on that.
Yeah. I mean, it's just not. I mean, my views. It's just not it's a collection of disparate peoples, is what it is. Who, even when they get to express their culture, it's like a kind of Disneyfied badge of it. It's the kind of hey, I'm Irish, and here I am with my kind of big Guinness hat and my massive shamrock on St. Paddy's Day and top of the morning to you. I mean, this isn't proper culture, and anybody who's from a proper culture will know. Any actual Irish guy would know that is not. You understand what I'm saying, right?
Well, there's a Judge Dredd comic about this, where in the far future, right, Ireland has been turned into a Disney resort, and the IRA is essentially fighting a war against fake Judge Dredd Disney. So it is something that's been going on for a while. But sorry, carry on.
Yeah, and I was going to say is that one of the tragedies in America, right, is that if you rewind just a few years back, okay, there was a moment, a cultural moment, where you did have all of these basically kind of ethnic enclaves self-selecting groups. I think of New York as an example, right? I'm a big fan of pro wrestling, as everybody knows, but one of the eras I love is kind of before before it becomes like Hulk Hogan, WWF. There's the old Vince Senior era where Bruno Sammartino is the champion, and there's there's Ivan Putski, the Polish Power, and there's Pedro Morales for the Puerto Rican fans, and there's here's Dominic DeNucci for the Italian guys, and every ethnic group had its own little hometown hero. And at that point, which is, I'm talking like 60s, 70s New York, there was a kind of moment there where there was enough of the genuine cultures of those people where it meant something to be an Italian American, because many of these guys were first or second generation immigrants, and they were taking something of the home country and reproducing it in that part in New York. Okay, you fast forward from that era to now, and almost all of the descendants of those people have become like the sludge, if you want to put it that way. I'm not saying lots of those people will be watching, I'm not trying to like insult you or something. I'm just saying like the tragedy of what has happened is that all of those genuine cultures have been replaced with the kind of ersatz McDonald's culture. It's like the further you get away from the original reference point of that original immigrant who's come in, the further you get away from a genuine culture, and the more you get the kind of fake and gay. Does that make sense? And I'm sure there are a lot of people who will recognize that in their own families. And I see it as a tragedy. I just see it as a kind of, it's like you're just basically destroying all of these separate cultures that once existed in the name of what? To produce what? And like a corporate NFL game, McDonald's. And I'm saying that's happening in America. That's also happening at a national level in this country. It's happening to the English people. It's happening to the French. It's happening to the actual Italians in Italy. And I see it as a goddamn tragedy, is what I see it as. So
you see this very, very clearly in the destruction of regional accents, right? And I noticed this in talking to people where I live, because you sort of have to go back like 1.5 or 2 generations, right? Where you can still find people who speak with, kind of like the regional accent of where I live. But effectively, other than a few words, I could have been born in Southern California, in Milwaukee, almost anywhere in the United States. And, as that kind of homogenization occurs, there's the resultant kind of like destruction of culture. The one I notice it in is I have a friend who watches English Premier League, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, like many people, who are into it, he's a massive stats nerd, plays, Football Manager, all of that. Mm-hmm. And he's sort of watching it out of spite at this point. But one of the things that I noticed in all of this, just not growing up with it, asking history, is that many of these organizations were genuinely clubs, right? They're kind of amateurized, where, okay, yes, you may get paid for it, but you had another job, and everyone was from the community and you kind of knew who was there. And then, you look at it now, right? And it's all owned by Arabs. There may be, if you're lucky, a third of the team that is even born in like the boundaries of the UK, right? And
it's so much worse than that, because once upon a time, your Manchester City fan would actually be from Manchester. They'd be local. The local lad would play in the club. Okay. Now, not only is the entire team a kind of cosmopolitan mix of some of the best players in the world, a Brazilian and African and blah, 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 the rainbow mix. Okay. Not only is that the case, but also the fandom is basically kind of like, picture a kind of, Pakistani guy with a mobile phone and a football top, or, a African dude in a Barcelona shirt. I mean, it's just the worst global brand. Everything's a global brand, and it fucking sucks. It's crap. I used to love football when I was a kid. I can barely feign interest anymore, because it's all just like nothing's connected to anything. It's just
Well,
like, nothing. What does this mean to me or anybody else? It's just like, anyway, carry on. Let's go.
no, not at all. And I think sooner than later we'll have to move on to the super chats, because I realize it's probably very, very late in the UK. But in that, you sort of see this kind of like shambling zombie culture that from a certain perspectives has the same signifiers, right? But it's stripped of any meaning whatsoever. And I've sort of avoided directly talking about the melting down of the Lee statue. But there are a few better, I guess, better kind of like pictures for this than Richmond, Virginia, which is not Charlottesville. It's an hour away. But there was also a prominent statue of Lee there. And I was there when they pulled it down. And by the time they pulled it down, there was only 2 other statues in the city, effectively. One of them was a statue erected in the 80s to a black tennis player who died of AIDS. I'll leave that there. And the other one was a completely fictitious statue erected by the man who painted Obama's presidential portrait. I cannot remember his name. And effectively, it is a black guy in a hoodie in the pose of Lee on the horse, right?
Right,
not any particular guy, just a random, model, right? And there are few better pictures for that than taking away something that was produced by a culture to mean something, right? This is a memorial to a war hero, and being replaced with, in the same form, right, almost in the same mold, just some random guy to represent kind of a petty ethnic hatred. And that's a pretty good, I guess, image for that.
There's a town near here called Woking. Some people in England will have heard of it, which is basically now just a kind of giant mall. It's like a mall that just it doesn't begin or end. It's just like a kind of massive mall that takes over the middle of this town. But if you actually find a way to get out of that mall, it's dotted around with these statues of just kind of random normal people, kind of like a woman with her hands on her hips looking a bit fed up, or black woman in a hoodie, or who's this random ethnic person. And that is basically what Woking is now. It's a mall filled with chain stores and dotted around with these completely meaningless random statues, which are not only kind of aesthetically displeasing, but also just kind of like, these people could be from anywhere. And this is it. It's the kind of anywhereization of all places. And one of the things that makes me sad when I look around is all of the little signifiers that would have marked out a place as unique and different. All of those little things, they don't survive. They close down. They're all, like, I think hundreds of pubs are closing every single week. All of these things are just being destroyed within. Well, I mean, it's taken less than 15 or 20 years of full-on kind of neoliberalism, as you might want to call it, or double liberalism, to completely fucking wreck everything that anybody loved. And it's happening everywhere, whether it's Virginia or Woking or, France, or you pick a country, it's happening everywhere. It's horrible. I think it's horrible because it's not anywhere an anywhereization. You can see it in the people, right? I mean, in this little town, Woking, there's this passage that you have to walk through to find your way out of the endless mall, right? And this passage is lined with these stores that sell like mobile phone covers. It's like, mobile phone cover stall, vaping stall, here's a shop that sells, like, the little connectors that you get on a mobile phone, and you look at, well, who is behind the counters of each of these places, and it's like some brown guy, right? An Indian maybe, or a Pakistan. I don't know where they're from. I've never asked them where they're from. Okay. And they're all just miserable. They're all just sitting there on their mobile phones, waiting for people to come and buy a mobile phone cover. And I just wonder, like, this is their life too. What are they doing? Why are they here? Do they want to be here? Why would anybody want to be here? Why am I here? You understand what I'm saying, right? It's just kind of like, and it's just you're faced with this utter nothingness. And I one day I might, next time I'm in that town, I might go up to one of those people and be like, where are you from originally? Weren't you happier when you were back in the market at home? Or weren't you happier when the streets were like full of vibrant and real and you were part of your own culture, you were part of something? Why, like, are you happy? Because I honestly don't think they do, because they look miserable as fucking sin. And that's the people working in the shops. Anyway, sorry.
No, not at all. So we have a good bit of super chat, so I want to get through of those. A name I cannot read says, some subversive text recommendations, Purify and Destroy by Jacques Semlin for you, referring to me, and the